By far, the biggest limitation when it comes to printing loudspeaker enclosures is the scale.
What is this?
Meanwhile, in the comments, the general feedback is that I should make these projects at least
3 times bigger than this!
Granted, these are all just plastic toys intended as torture tests for 3D printers, so if I were to make something like this for real with a full-size driver and several hundred watts of power thrown at it, the process would involve a different machine entirely. Let's have a look.
Hey Pete, what is that?
That is a Chinese weather balloon. Well, it's coming quick. All right.
Your delivery experience may vary, though what has fallen out of the sky is the brand new Shapeoko 5 Pro CNC machine from Carbide 3D. This is kind of a big deal, especially given the otherwise modest nature of my makerspace, so before I can put this thing together, I need a bigger bench. The machine commands a 60 by 35 inch footprint, which translates to this entire corner. Amazon says $1,000. I say, f that, wouldn't be much of a maker if I couldn't make a bench. There, bench. And I designed it such that the final piece gets to be CNC cut, so more on that later. Meanwhile, as I move on to the assembly, I should also point out that until I expand into a larger work area, I don't plan on tearing any of this back down just to showcase a different machine. This is now the Carbide 3D corner, and while several competing brands had also gotten in touch about bringing something like this in here, the Shapeoko 5 Pro is what I've chosen for the long run. As you can see, this is a serious bit of prosumer hardware even for a dedicated woodshop, let alone a single car garage. What's more, as an upgrade to the stock 65mm trim router, Carbide 3D offers a 1200 watt variable frequency drive spindle kit for substantially more cutting power, digital RPM control directly from the G-code, and next to no operating noise, which also makes for better neighbors should you happen to be in that boat. I just plain don't like noise, so I've taken precautions going so far as to hang acoustic foam, hopefully absorbing some of the higher frequency reflections. Speaking of acoustics, as we're done with the assembly, let's discuss a warm-up exercise, aka the feature build. Right away, there is something quite extraordinary about the sound of a well-tuned, high-order bandpass subwoofer. Consider the experience that just about any enclosure, no matter how flat the response, will still have that one note at which the bass, even at low volume, will still seem overwhelmingly potent, heavy, or even saturating. Well, now imagine something that does this at every frequency, even without cabin gain, and this recipe begins with a single Audio Dynamics 2200 Series 8. Here, I made generous use of the available cargo space to lay out the internals for this 7th order bandpass. Acoustically, it should dominate the entire 24 to 48 Hz octave with the authority of a much larger driver and that iconic slow and heavy bottom end as the resonances build on top of each other. So, if you're a fan of the Guess What's in My Trunk segments across YouTube, consider this the ultimate sleeper box. Plain and unassuming on the outside, hyper-engineered for acoustic mayhem on the inside, and I've gone the stack fabrication route as it is lengthy and repetitive, ultimately giving me a chance to work any potential kinks out of the machine. Anyway, about that final piece for the bench. Now seems like a good time, and just to get me started, Carbide 3D has also included a generous assortment of cutters, which I will showcase throughout a series of the upcoming videos. For this, all I need is a number 102 1/8 inch flat end mill. That fits into the standard ER11 collet, and just to give you a sense of what a VFD spindle sounds like, here it is compared to a standard household trim router, both operating at roughly the same speed. Needless to say, even apart from the massive torque and the digital precision, the VFD spindle justifies its worth simply as it is quiet. Granted, once we've zeroed out the machine and the blade meets the wood, between the dust collector and the cutter, I can still hear the dust collector. So that's getting the boot, though in the meantime, see if you can tell how these circles aren't quite circular. Mind you, the motors are doing what they're told with robotic precision, nevertheless it would appear that I have some backlash on the X-axis. We'll obviously tend to it before the feature build, but not before I'm done with this vertical accessory board. The tabs come off, the piece aligns against the 2 lag bolts along the bottom, and attaches by way of 4 more lag bolts, each inset along a corner. And now that my bench is done, let's quickly work the slack out of the X-axis. Right away, for a nice before and after, I'll switch to a number 302 60-degree V-bit cutter and make Sophie a name tag for work. Come back around with a number 102 end mill and there it is, version 1. The problem, by the way, turned out to be a loose ball nut behind the carriage, and with the near immediate assistance from the Carbide 3D support team, I had the machine sorted literally in a matter of minutes. Here's version 2, and on Sophie's request, I also rounded the corners. The results are nothing short of professional. In fact, what started out as a tag for Sophie later ended as a batch for the entire store. But for the moment, I'm just amused at the fact that I can do this on the fly, getting to surprise the wife with something that I crafted only minutes earlier.
Version 2. Oh, you're nowhere near close enough.
So the machine works, and with a 1200 watt spindle it won't be fazed by whether I'm cutting into plastic or even metal. More to the point, a machine that can slice through cast iron isn't going to fuss about a soft sheet of MDF. It'll simply decimate it all day, every day, and then a decade later it'll still do it like it's had an easy life. So let me just retire the Harbor Freight dust collector and tag in the DeWalt Stealth Sonic shop vac. This is how you machine in close quarters without pissing off the neighbors. In fact, if that's been the one reservation keeping you from the hobby, and you aren't keen on a fully enclosed solution, then something like this is probably your best bet. Anyway, let's go get some wood for the project. And if your experience is anything like mine, dating back to the tiny wood shop in Arizona, you go to the store, you get that 4x8 sheet of MDF, take it over to the saw and have the guy rip it into quarters because one way or another those 4x2 cuts will fit inside the car. And the absolute beauty here is that once you get them home, they can go directly onto the machine. That's how much cutting area you actually get. In fact, it's right in the model number, 4x2. Incidentally, there's also a 2x2 and a 4x4. Either way, since the sheet that I'm cutting into is as large as the entire bed, I've opted for some creative work holding. Here's version 1 of my alignment jig. That puts a target right over the T-track, and with the screws extending down to the nuts, I get some very strong, very low profile clamping action. The machine is zeroed, the bit is set, and off it goes reciting the toolpath. Afterwards, the work holding screws come back out, the tabs are cut, and that is layer number 1. Up next, our first glance at the internals as the machine goes to work on the second layer, methodically carving out the waveguides. Quite a few more tabs this time around, and with Sophie ready to apply the glue, the pieces are held on with these 1/4 bolts. Half an hour later, they come back out, rinse and repeat. Except instead of trying to flush cut the tabs with an oscillating tool, I elected to leave a little excess for the trim router. And so, layer after layer, the enclosure takes form. Best of all, given how quiet this whole setup is, working alongside it, even with a set of open back headphones, can be done in comfort. In fact, if you recall the music box demo from earlier, you can still hear it with the machine operating. Alright, so this is with the blade cutting into the wood. So that's impressive. However, as the last batch of layers was being cut, I noticed some new discrepancies, this time isolated to the right. As you can see here, these rounded features aren't quite round, and the holes for the bolts are somewhat out of place as well, which inadvertently took its toll on how the pieces align. Fortunately, I have a bitchin' sander, and like I said, this is only a warm-up.
You're what they call a practice girl.
And what you come to practice with this machine is maintenance, specifically making rounds retightening bolts that you thought for sure had been already tightened once or twice before. So you lurk about with a set of hex drivers, scowling at some unassuming bolt like,
How tight are you?
but with all the backlash worked out of the gantry, the machine delivers. In fact, real quick, there's this board that Sophie's been using as a stovetop cover, and since we have the technology, I'll just pop in the number 202 bullnose and do some laps around the sheet. Further down the road, this cutter will be used for 3D rest machining, but today it is carving a channel around Sophie's new stovetop cover. A quick tool change to the flat end mill, and once the piece is done, the tabs come off, a quick go around with a 1/4 inch roundover, and there it is, ready for the reveal.
Hey! Hell yeah! Oh, look at that! Oh, wow. Woo!
Now keep in mind, this is bare MDF, so you're still going to have to paint it.
Yeah.
Speaking of paint, for anyone interested in what exohide looks like when applied with a foam brush rather than a roller, this is 2 coats all set for Sophie to abuse as a test for another project. But the takeaway here is that the machine is trammed and just in time for the access panel. Here's a 10mm thick plate of cast acrylic, and while I could probably cut this with my CO2 laser, I wouldn't be able to machine it. This is where I switch to the number 274, zirconium nitride coated single fluted end mill, first pocketing out the insets, followed by some screw holes, ending with the outer shape. Needless to say, this is an excellent way to work with acrylic, but now I need to cut some foam, which is definitely where I would use a laser. Nevertheless, here's a number 112, 0.0625 inch flat cutter, and at 22,000 RPM, it's pretty much a laser. So, with the enclosure sanded, Sophie applies a base coat of exohide with a foam brush, followed by a textured coat with the recommended roller. All that's left to do now is the electrical stuff. The sub is wired in parallel, which, given the impedance across the operating bandwidth, should give us somewhere between 2 and 300 watts out of the tiny Audio Dynamics MK300.2 amplifier in the car. But first, let's try it indoors on about 20 watts by way of this hilariously thin 24-gauge cable running all the way over to the topping TP21 amplifier on my desk. The response looks to be on point even without psychoacoustic smoothing. I will, however, apply a low-pass filter right at 50 Hz as we aren't actually using any of these upper modes. Here comes Sophie for her first listen, and just for some context, I put the 7th order up against my 12-inch downfiring studio sub powered by one of the Behringer A500s. Turn it up a little bit. That's fine. Alright. Now I'm going to show you how to switch to the other sub. What you're going to do is going to press the power button on the lower amplifier. Yeah. See? Now, all you have is the KRKs running and they're playing from 50 Hz up.
Okay.
Now, reach behind the topping and there's a toggle, flip it down. Ooh! Now switch.
That's significantly harder.
You like how the bass is just hugging you?
Yeah.
Like everywhere. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it's definitely, it's a lot warmer than your that's a 12, right? The one that you got down there? Yeah, it's definitely got more warmth to it than the 12 does. Because the 12 is definitely cold and isolated and definite, I guess would be a good way to say that. It's precise. Whereas this one just kind of hugs you. There we go. Oh, that's so cool! And like I can just barely see it over there.
And that's the gist of it. The sub oozes heavy lows from the 50s down into the 20s and does it on less than 20 watts from a small hobby amp. So let's now dump it into the car on roughly 10 times the power, once again with nothing but a 50 Hz low pass filter. And there it is. No tuning, no gain matching, yet we're still flat across the 50s down into the 20s. For an SPL test, I elected to move the car out of the garage, and just as a technical note, all that I'm doing here is maxing out the little amplifier. The sub is just there for it, sitting unbothered, though even a modest couple hundred watts is enough to register 128.7 decibels at 35 Hz, maintaining similar output above and below that frequency. Needless to say, there is an in-car demo at the very end, but first, a few words about the Shapeoko 5 Pro. Right away, as was my hope, cutting all those layers gave the machine plenty of time to show its quirks, and thankfully it's nothing beyond the bolts coming loose over time or the occasional bit of maintenance tracking down the backlash. Otherwise, I couldn't be happier sitting in my office doing some very important things while the machine on the other side of the wall is basically just another me out there cutting and drilling and vacuuming, all the while making very little noise. The VFD spindle is a must, whether you're looking to machine metal, go fast into softer materials like wood, or just be plain quiet. At any rate, with a bit of CNC practice behind my belt, I dropped off the practice enclosure over to Audio Dynamics, along with some other novelty builds, taking a moment to muse over how small an amp carried that entire performance, and to think we also make ones that produce 12,000 watts. Anyway, having a CNC machine of this size marks a turning point for a lot of what's to come. So, just for general perspective, without even leaving my office chair, this logo is 3D printed, on the off chance that I forget my name. This focus gear is 3D printed, PETG by the way. This LED bar holding bit is 3D printed, so are all these feet here. This traffic light is 3D printed, all those orange bits back there are 3D printed, the focus ring on here is 3D printed. You get the idea. Point being that between the things that can be 3D printed and now also CNC cut, I can start pointing to bespoke creations the size of furniture. I merely have to think them up and the machines do the rest. That being said, massive thanks go out to Carbide 3D for supplying their latest and greatest, and there's already a series of new build videos underway. So rate this warm-up exercise as you see fit, subscribe if you're so inclined, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!
Oh god, that is you making that noise. Okay, I'm making up. Yeah, I love it. Wow.
What do you think?
That's impressive. We can do hair tricks with this.
Let's back hit this. What do you think?
Holy shit.
How's that?
That's awesome.
So if someone wasn't here in the car with us, how would you describe this?
I don't really want to say ghetto blaster because it's not quite.
It is sort of Ghetto Blaster, yeah.
Yeah, but not quite.
I think what you're referring to there is the slowness of the bass. It's by no means fast, it's by no means tight.
Yeah. Aw. God, I love it.
All the way down.
It tickles my ears.
exaggerating the punch.
I was gonna say, that's a bit punchier.
It's,
Yes. I think that definitely ties into it feeling a lot more of a warmth to it.